circumstantial. I speak to heal. Yo, what is going on? Welcome back to Arm Yourself with Knowledge, the show that educates and liberates. I'm your guy, John Tell. Thank you for tuning in. I got a couple stories for y'all that I would like to share with y'all. The first one I want to get into is the migrant situation in New York City. And so for those who are not aware, I'm going to get y'all up to speed really quick. So as y'all know, or maybe not know, Texas and Florida have been sending the migrants that are coming to those states to major cities, largely major Democratic, liberal, so-called liberal cities. And it is sending those areas into a financial tailspin. So this article is via Yahoo News, and so it's a midday in midsummer, and dozens of men and women are crouching, splayed out on cardboard or standing in Midtown Manhattan, beaten down by the heat. After a journey that's taken many of them across an ocean or through a dangerous jungle, past multiple border enforcement agents demanding payment to allow them to keep moving forward. They're hoping their journey is finally coming to an end. But in the United States, they've come to a standstill a block away from Grand Central Station. The scene at the Roosevelt Hotel, the first stop most migrants make in the city, where they're assigned to a place to sleep in the city's overfilled shelter system, appears untenable. Crowds snake down the block, barely contained by young intake workers, and slots for the city's shelter system only open up every few hours. TV crews take tracking shots of the migrants, many of them men traveling alone from Africa. The scene seems almost designed to prove a point that New York City's first-term mayor Eric Adams has been making for weeks to anyone that will listen. We need help. Adams said when he asked about the situation at the Roosevelt on Monday, quote, and it's not going to get any better from this moment. It's downhill, end quote. For the past year, Adams has struck the same gloomy, dour note about the arrival of migrants to New York City, a city built by generations of immigrants. It was a year ago this week, buses filled with migrants sent by reactionary governors from the South began arriving in New York City, daring it to live up to its billing as a welcoming city for immigrants looking for a new home. Since last year, more than 95,000 migrants have entered the city's shelter system, with 56,200 still in the city's care. More than 18,000 migrant children have been enrolled in city schools. At the same time, Adams has repeatedly called on the federal government to both support the city financially and do something to stop other localities from washing their hands of global migration and instead just busing migrants to New York City. But over the past year, immigrant advocates say migrants have been alternatively used as a political cudgel and an excuse by Adams for cutting city services. And it could have played out very differently. In interviews with the Rolling Stone, legal service providers, nonprofit leaders, and migrants themselves talked about how City Hall has cut off experts that have experience working with migrants, effectively locking them out of the process entirely. While City Hall has begged DC for resources, local aid workers believe that the Adams administration has been ignoring those readily at its disposal. Organizations that have helped welcome migrants into the city for decades. This has left these aid workers scrambling to help, while many migrants are stuck in a bewildering holding pattern inside the city shelter system. Aid groups say they have knocked on shelter doors only to be turned away, sent emails and made phone calls to City Hall just to be met with silence, and dismissed by Adams repeatedly as outside agitators. Instead, they've had to do their work without the city's help, relying on social media and migrant social networks to get in touch with asylum seekers and offer to help them find legal help and more permanent housing. By the way, City Hall did not respond to a request for comment. Quote, if you were in any other industry and continue to operate under the ways in which the city has, you would be fired, end quote, says Murad Awadeh, executive director of the New York Immigration Coalition, a nonprofit that assists migrants in New York City. He said that's what it comes down to. In August 2022, New York City officials began to report that migrants were arriving at New York City's Port Authority bus terminal on the far west side of Manhattan after being rerouted from other states. Many of those migrants had been sent to D.C. by Texas Governor Greg Abbott, a political human trafficking ploy that gave migrants who had crossed the border to legally request asylum a one-way ticket to cities he considered to be sanctuaries. After ribbing from Mayor Eric Adams, Abbott took it one step further. He began directly shipping asylum seekers to the city. This was bad timing for Adams, as the city's housing courts had only recently reopened and thousands of New Yorkers were themselves entering the city shelter system evicted from their homes amidst skyrocketing rents and inflation. The city, which guarantees a right to shelter for anyone unhoused, was about to have a major test of its already overburdened system. We're all in this together to deal with this influx of innocent people who were seeking asylum or fleeing wars, who are fleeing crises in their own country, Adams said during a press conference as the buses began arriving. He also said New York is one of those few states where you have a right to shelter, one of the few. We're not like those who are sending people away during their time and needs. We are a representative of what this country stands for, and we will always continue. At that time, only 3,000 asylum seekers had arrived in New York. In early August 2022, the first buses from Texas arrived at the Port Authority, and migrants were spoken to who had been placed on the bus without knowing where they were going, who said they had not been able to access water during the 2-day trip. We had to provide medical attention to at least 8 asylum seekers who were all exhausted from the trip. Many said they didn't have enough to eat or drink. They were very hungry and thirsty, says Manuel Castro, the commissioner for the city's Office of Immigrant Affairs. Multiple mutual aid groups distributed water, food, and help provide translation help to migrants looking to get into the city's shelter system. But City Hall had other ideas. Quickly, it began to bar them from Port Authority entirely, accusing them of encouraging migrants to come to the city. The aid groups had pushed the administration to get both New Yorkers and new migrants out of the shitty shelter system fast through the use of housing vouchers. Those vouchers, the Adams administration said, would cost too much money. Quote, when we started seeing the narrative that this administration was selling, which was straight up divisive, a scarcity mentality and trying to pit communities against each other, we've been providing the city with solutions. They just chose not to take them, end quote. Instead, the city began to create a network of private contractors to help handle the flow of migrants to the city, which was quickly reaching 2,000 every week. $1 million contracts were handed out to the contractors with little oversight. Yet it cost too much money to handle housing vouchers? Miss me with the bullshit. Urgent care companies with no experience running shelters were put in charge of hastily converted vacant schools and offices without showers or working air conditioning. At these respite centers, as they called them, migrants told about hot, cramped conditions where overwhelmed young workers struggle to handle the needs of hundreds of people who might not speak their language and are confused about the bureaucratic hurdles against them getting a work permit. One of the migrants to arrive in New York during the summer of 22 was Jonathan from Venezuela. Jonathan came to the city after fleeing political and societal instability. He says that with the lack of medicine in the area, the hospitals had become morgues. His family took a dangerous, popular route to the U.S. through the deadly jungle of the Darien Gap between Colombia and Panama, as it's referred to hell on earth, and then on foot through Mexico and the final few miles through the barren desert that stretches the U.S.-Mexico border. Eventually, Jonathan, his wife, and 3 children arrived in Texas last July. Like so many other migrants, found themselves on a bus to New York City. Jonathan and his family were sent to the city's intake center and quickly placed at a family shelter in Brooklyn. A year later, they're still there. And that's the problem that Adams and the city is facing. New migrants, many of them from countries without established communities in the country, are getting stuck in the shelter system, unable to legally work in the U.S. until at least 6 months after they start the legal process to declare asylum. And that's only if they begin the paperwork, which needs to be filled out in English and done with the help of someone who understands the process. Many migrants that have been spoken to outside of crowded shelters haven't begun the process because they have no access to the internet and no information about where to go to find legal help. Jonathan found assistance at Mixteca, a nonprofit organization based in Sunset Park, which helped him get started on his asylum application and find resources for his family. He's telling that he had important documents taken from him by border agents in Central America on his way to the U.S., like his passport, further slowing down the process. He's still waiting on a work permit, which is what he says stands between him and moving out of the shelter, maybe even to another city, wherever there might be work for him. Quote, you could resolve almost all of the problems if you started giving out work permits. People could go to different cities, different towns, and it would all help these other problems too. You start being able to rent, end quote, Jonathan says in Spanish. In organizations across the city, aid workers have wondered why the city isn't relying on the constellation of community-based nonprofits that have decades of experience helping migrants navigate the asylum process and find housing. Activists have told that regular meetings between nonprofits and the city's Office of Immigrant Affairs no longer happen, and that calls and messages sent to the city hall go unanswered. And now the demographics of migrants are changing. Now that the demographics of migrants are changing, the job has become that much harder. 42-year-old Musa fled Mauritania because of discrimination against dark-skinned Africans in his country. Before he left, the father of 9 was an electrician, but he says racism made it extremely hard for him to make a living for his family. He flew from Mauritania to Turkey and then to Nicaragua, and then on foot and in a car to Mexico, and eventually crossed the border in Arizona. Wow, that's quite a trip. His family paid for a flight to Cincinnati, but he was unable to find any work or housing. On WhatsApp, word spread that New York City would give migrants a place to sleep and food to eat. So in June, he came to the city and he has been staying at a shelter in Harlem, in a former jail that's been converted to house asylum seekers. At a nearby church, he's taking English lessons, and the same church has helped him start his asylum application. But no one from the city has contacted him about helping his immigration case or finding more permanent housing. Through a French interpreter, he says that he didn't know when he'd leave the shelter. Musa was at the Office of African Communities Together, a nonprofit group in Harlem that has a decade of experience helping African migrants in the city. The organization has tried repeatedly to get permission from the city to help asylum seekers in shelters, but have been met with silence. Quote, we want to go there and do a Know Your Rights presentation. We need to work together, and we send emails and they never answer us. The problem we have with the city is that they say they're open to migrants coming, and now they're saying they have no shelter. The problem is that all of the decisions they make without are the input of migrants like myself, end quote. Some of the African migrants were bused to New York by the government, while others heard about the fact that the city is welcoming migrants through its right to shelter policy. Now, the Adams administration is trying to effectively end that policy by kicking single men out of shelters once they've spent 60 days there, well before most of them would be allowed to legally work. Since last summer, Adams has cast blame directly on the federal government and President Biden for failing to help New York City pay for its shelter expenses or speeding up the process by which migrants can get work permits. On top of that, Adams has used the arrival of migrants as an excuse to blow holes into the city's own budget and argue for an austerity agenda. He's dropped migrants in the gymnasiums of city schools without warning. Wow. And threatened to take over parts of Central Park to build tent shelters. All the while, millions of square feet of office space sit empty throughout the city. From the outside, it appears that City Hall very much wants to paint the arrival of migrants as a contest of resources for New Yorkers. It's unclear to what end. Many New Yorkers aren't having it. They've opened their doors, classrooms, and pocket books to the next generation of a city built for and by immigrants. Jonathan's 3 kids attended New York City public schools this year, and he was thrilled by the attention they received. In a bustling city of 9 million, the impact of 90,000 migrants on the cityscape has been negligible. New Yorkers have always, as always, just keep moving. Musician Marco Trigoso, an asylum seeker from Peru, who's still waiting on his work authorization after arriving in New York City this past March, still thinks of New York City as a place of dreams for people who are no longer welcome in their homes. There are good people here. It's not perfect. There are so many cultures, a lot of disorder, but every day you see little things that show off people's humanity. You just say, wow, how beautiful. For those moments, it's all worth it. I'm going to take a quick break and I'll get into the next article. Know you're alive. That's enough for me. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the UK really quick. So what's going on there definitely applies to what's going on in the US when it comes to gentrification and race issues, culture issues. However, the UK, it definitely was spurred on by Brexit and exasperated by the pandemic. And as we know, the pandemic has set new norms and standards across the world, and governments have been able to crack down on a lot of things since. So what this is talking about is a lot of communities in inner city London being shut down still since COVID, and lots of businesses have not really opened up, and it's causing a lot of problems financially for the UK by extension, but especially London. And so this article is saying via MSN, by the way, paying a premium for a buzzy social life is looking pretty threadbare, though. The WFH regime works well for older established employees living in the suburbs, but deprives newcomers of mentoring opportunities, on-the-job learning, and socializing with colleagues. Stripped of much of their regular clientele since lockdown, many surviving pubs and clubs close absurdly early and far sooner than in other great cities worldwide and across the UK too. Just a quarter of Soho is open after midnight, a pathetic total for the capital's main entertainment district. Last year, Westminster Council idiotically scrapped alfresco dining following noise complaints from local residents. I'm always baffled by Zone 1 dwellers who complain about noise pollution like some parish councillor from Midsummer Murders than rather someone who's chosen to live in, Soho. It's a bit like moving to Svalbard and whining about the cold, which I completely understand that, because living in Lancaster, there was tons of white people that moved to Lancaster from places like Brooklyn. You're used to loud noise, and you're coming to Lancaster expecting it to be quiet. It's not. And you want to complain and call the cops on people for being too noisy. You moved here, and this is a city of noisy culture. Make that make sense. Small wonder that creative types are finding city life unaffordable. Won't someone please think of the hipsters? May not tug at the heartstrings. But London's history has always merged creativity and carousing, from Shouter to Kit Marlowe to the gin-soaked demi-monde of the 80s Soho. If Dr. Johnson were perambulating at the clubs and coffee houses of the capital today, he might well repudiate his famous dictum: "Sir, when a man is tired of London, he is tired of life. For there is in London all that life can afford." The contemporary version will be closer to: "Sir, when a man is tired of London, he seeks a new life. For a life in London is not something that anyone can afford."
Hide yourself from troops to the next galaxy in 7 seas and burn, ice, cold, no breathe, medicate, breathe, IV, medicate, congratulate the freedom state and conquer the community and dilate the camaraderie, heighten the mortality, configure the permanent smoke screen of never-ending need, purify your seed, cause heaven is here and human soul is in need.
The Riverfront Brawl brings unwelcome attention to historic civil rights city in Alabama. Montgomery, Alabama, 3 white boaters in Alabama's capital city will be charged with misdemeanor assault for a riverfront brawl with a black boat captain that drew nationwide attention, with more charges likely to come. Videos of the incident, which circulated widely on social media, have proven crucial in investigating what happened. Montgomery Chief Daryl Albert has said one person has turned himself in and the 2 others have agreed to turn themselves in by the end of the day on Tuesday. So this article is from yesterday. The investigation is ongoing and more charges are likely. The fight was largely split among racial lines and began when a moored pontoon boat blocked the Harriet II riverboat from docking in its designated place along the city's riverfront. The Harriet II had 227 passengers on board for a tour. The viral video of white boaters assaulting a black riverboat captain and the following melee brought unwelcome attention to the historic city, which is known across the country for Montgomery bus boycotts in the 50s and voting rights marches in the 60s. The city in recent decades has tried to move beyond its reputation as the site of racial tension and to build a tourism trade instead based on its critical role in the civil rights movement. I don't think you can judge any community by any one incident. This is not indicative of who we are, end quote. Mayor Stephen Reed said Tuesday. He noted that the people in the pontoon boat were not from Montgomery. It's important for us to address this as an isolated incident, one that was avoidable and one that was brought on by individuals who chose the wrong path of action, Reed said, end quote. Before the fight began, the riverboat captain tried to contact the pontoon boat owner by loudspeaker. People on the other boat responded with obscene gestures, curse words, and taunting, the police chief said. The riverboat co-captain took another vessel to shore to attempt to move the pontoon boat and was attacked by several members of the private boat. Albert said several people from the riverboat came to the co-captain's defense, engaging in what we have all seen since on social media. Video captured by bystanders showed that once the Harriet II docked, several people from the riverboat rushed to confront the people on the pontoon boat and more fighting broke out. The video showed people being shoved, punched, kicked, and one man hitting someone with a chair. At least one person was knocked into the water. At least I saw 2 or 3, and then 2 jumping into the water after avoiding getting their ass beat. The co-captain was doing his job. He was simply trying to move the boat just enough so the cruise ship could park safely, but it quickly escalated. The police chief said that so far the charges are against the people from the pontoon boat who assaulted the co-captain and a 16-year-old who got involved. Police are trying to locate and question the man with the chair. The fight took place along Montgomery's downtown riverfront, in an area where slave owners once unloaded people from steamboats to be sold at auction. Now the city has developed the area into a tourist and recreation place with restaurants, bars, and hotels, and the Harriet II take tourists on sightseeing trips with food and entertainment along the Alabama River. The brawl sparked dozens of internet memes and videos, with some joking that the chair should be placed in a local museum. Albert said, while some made racial taunts, the police department does not believe the motivation behind the fight rises to the standard of a hate crime. Alcohol is believed to be an escalating factor, and I do agree with that. It did happen to be white people pummeling a black man, but I do not consider this a hate crime. I see this as a matter of alcohol and people thinking that they could just do whatever they want. They happen to be white. Krista Owen of Clanton was aboard the riverboat with her husband and their daughter for a dinner cruise to celebrate the daughter's 12th birthday. She said the riverboat captain said on loudspeaker, "Black pontoon boat, move your boat," and that passengers also yelped for the boat to move so they could dock. They shrugged their shoulders. She said Owen said, the crew member, identified by police as the co-captain of the riverboat, got off to move the pontoon boat a few feet. Owen said the tension was obvious and mounting before punches were thrown. She said passengers felt helpless as they watched the co-captain get pummeled by several people on shore. Owen, who is a stay-at-home mom, filmed the conversation as it began on the dock. She said, as a mother of many, she knows the importance of being able to document how a conflict started. Once the boat was able to dock, she said her family had to figure out how to get off the boat safely with the fighting going on around them. It didn't have to escalate to that, she said. All right, stay tuned. I'll be right back. All right, so this last story I want to talk about real quick. It's again about the migrants being bused to New York City. So get this, and this was 17 hours ago. 5 more buses full of migrants head to New York City as mayor says system nearing breaking point. Mayor Adams, you got some explaining to do, yo. The influx of migrants to New York City from the state of Texas continues as 5 more bus loads are expected in the Big Apple through the night and into the morning. Please check out the piece that I did a little bit earlier in this webisode. I am going to post links in the comment section so that y'all can get more information on this and check it out on your own. Do your own research. Y'all already know how I am. It is important to do your research. Don't just take my word for things. Look things up yourselves. We want people to do their own research, you know. Let me see, the Riverfront Brawl. Let me put that in the comment section for y'all to check out. We actually also on our YouTube, on our Facebook, the Leon Block Independent Media page, we also did post new footage that shows exactly what went on from a different angle. So definitely check out that video as well. And then I'm going to post this article from London about gentrification in here because that is extremely important. And don't forget the similarities, because other countries are facing gentrification in the same very fashion that we are too. We just like to think here in America that we're the only one that faces problems. So thank you for tuning into this episode. Definitely check out the rest of these stories, and again, do your research to check out to get more information as well. I appreciate y'all. Y'all already know, follow and subscribe. The information is at the bottom of the screen. You can email me at theleonblock@gmail.com. If you like what you see and you would like to help and support our platform, you can also donate to any of the handles at the bottom of the screen. We truly appreciate it. Please share this stream as well and follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube. Really appreciate it. And y'all have a blessed day.